It's the week of March 1st, 2019, and you're listening to the Missouri GrowingPoint Agronomy podcast. I'm your co-host, Pioneer Field Agronomist Jaime Farmer, and with me as always is my counterpart to the east, Nick Monnig. Nick, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, Jamie, good to be back. Good to get started again after Christmas and the holidays.
Yeah, looking forward for a warm-up. This winter's been a long, brutal one. We've got a pretty special topic here today, Nick. We've got a special guest with us here. Why don't you introduce him?
Today we're going to have Shane Kinne talk with us. Shane's with Missouri Corn Growers Association. Shane is in charge of public policy and grower engagement.
So, Shane, welcome to the show. We're happy to have you here. If you could just briefly kind of tell the listeners what it is you do for Missouri Corn Growers Association.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. We're excited when you all reached out and want to talk about some of these issues that we think are important. As Nick said, my title is Director of Policy and Grower Engagement, so the question is, what's that really mean? Really, my day-to-day activities are being the voice of the farmer, the Missouri corn grower, into the policy process, so the government process. And so we're working at the state capitol, we're working in D.C. I was just in D.C. a couple weeks ago. Really just taking the message of what's the priority of corn farmers in Missouri to the offices of our elected officials. And so that's my role. We're a grower-led organization, and so our board of directors is made of farmers from all across the state of Missouri, and then they make up our priorities. They tell us as a staff what we're supposed to be working on, and we go to work.
Well, thanks, Shane. Thanks for describing that. I guess the big question that our listeners would have is, what does Missouri Corn Growers Association actually do?
As I described, we're a grower-led association, and so kind of two hats that we talk about. One's the checkoff side, which most growers understand the checkoff pretty well. That penny comes to us, and we use that for market development. Growing new markets, promoting corn overseas, quality overseas. But really the other side of where I spend most of my time is the association, and that's where a grower decides to pay a membership to be part of our association, to have a voice in what we're working on. And so what the association really does is we serve as one voice for the growers. And so when we're on the Hill in DC and we're working on issues, you have to remember that as a population, growers, farmers directly involve about 2% of the U.S. population, if that. So if you look at the electoral map, you look at who's voting and who's deciding these elections, we're a pretty small percentage of folks out there in the U.S. We're a big voice. I think if you hear our current president talk a lot, he talks about farmers a lot, and we think, that's obviously a good thing. So people really respect growers. But when you get down to the details of some of the policies, I think we all know that we have some big challenges out there, from whether it's biotech issues, animal rights types issues. Those are big issues. And the important thing for us to remember that since we're such a small part of the population, we've got to be talking from the same page. We've got to be talking with one voice. The more we split our messages, the more we're going to lose, more than we already are. And so the association really serves as an avenue for growers to get together, to decide where to focus, what to focus on, and serve as that one voice. And so when we're going to the Hill, our U.S. senators aren't hearing 5-6 different things from Missouri corn farmers, because when that happens, it's hard for them to make a decision on what to do, and we want to have that unified voice.
Yeah, Shane, I'd say, I was part of the Corn Roots program that you guys do last year, and I was really, surprised and impressed by the amount of education that you guys do. And I didn't realize that some of the legislatures out there come from areas that aren't in agriculture, don't produce corn, and they have no idea how it works. And there's a huge step there just educating those guys. So we definitely appreciate all the work you guys do there.
Yeah, that's a good point. If we got a bill that we're trying to get through Congress that directly impacts farmers, maybe the Farm Bill, for example, maybe a piece of ethanol legislation, there might be 30 people in that whole Capitol building that knows anything directly about farming. We're going to need the votes of all of them, whether it's a guy from southern Florida, from Miami district, from Los Angeles. So we've got a job to do our best to educate those folks on why they should care about our issues and the truth about our issues, because they obviously hear a lot of things that maybe aren't super accurate.
Shane, for us out in the field as agronomists, we see a lot of the value that an association like Missouri Corn Growers Association brings. But if you were to just talk specifically to growers that maybe don't necessarily know the importance or value of associations, how would you kind of summarize that for them?
I think the biggest value of association to a grower is that it allows them to really focus on their job, and that's being a good farmer. The last thing most farmers have time to do is get on the internet every morning and figure out what's happening in D.C., what they need to be calling their rep about, what's the most important things, what can be ignored. And so I think that's really where we provide value, is helping keep growers up to date on what's happening in DC and letting them know what's important, what's not, and when they do need to activate. Because my grandpa, he didn't have time to call DC every morning and complain about a bunch of issues. He might have done that, actually, I think. But in general, that's the goal of the farmer, is to do a good job farming. They be focused on what's my agronomic practices? How can I get better this year? They can't. If you're worried consistently about what DC is doing, what your state capital is doing, that's going to take away from that. But at the same time, they're making decisions that impact what you're able to do on the farm level, and so you definitely need to have a voice in that. But the association helps facilitate that.
I think that's the best point right there, is that voice. As we look for the next generations to come, that's going to be even more so important to have associations like Missouri Corn Growers, out there speaking on your behalf.
So Shane, I guess the other big question that comes up, which is, what are the major issues for Missouri corn growers that you guys are working on today?
Yeah, as we look at issues every year and we prioritize, it's really the two questions we always ask ourselves is, how do we grind more corn? And so how do we eat up that pile of corn, and from the market standpoint, to drive price, hopefully eventually up? And then the second question is, how do we protect the dollar, that profit on the back end? And so as we look at policy issues, we see how's that impacting both of those sides. And so right now, most growers obviously know trade is a huge topic of discussion. I think everyone's always thought about trade, but obviously this past couple of years, it's been top of the headlines every morning more. And so that's a huge area we're focused in 2019, as far as making sure we're passing new trade agreements, but also focusing on the China issue. I think it's had a lot of soybean focus, but there's a lot of areas that dealing with China, fixing some issues with China, could really benefit corn production, corn growers. China's a huge potential market for ethanol, actually. There's some huge opportunities there, but until we have a fair trading relationship with China, that's just an inconsistent market and continues to be. And so I think most growers would agree that this current administration is doing what they need to do. Unfortunately, when you look at these retaliatory tariffs and things like that, ag continues to be the folks that get hit with retaliation. And so we're hoping those can come to a conclusion. We're hoping that this NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, the new one, gets passed through Congress, because we really need to be looking at new areas of trade. And so you look at some of these Asian countries like Japan, Vietnam, Southeast Asia, we have huge market potential there. As we work in those markets and we talk to people on the ground, the demand's there for our product, whether that's corn, ethanol, DDGs. Talk to the livestock industry there. They want them. They're excited about them. But at the end of the day, if the trade policy isn't correct, if we can't send our product into that country without a huge tariff or without some biotech barrier, that trade doesn't happen. And so we're really focused on pushing this current administration and Congress to really begin addressing a lot of those issues with new trade agreements. So that's one big area we're working.
So you mentioned ethanol. So ethanol is a big market in Missouri and across the Midwest in general. So what is the latest in terms of Missouri ethanol? Any issues we're working through or policies there?
Yeah, we're really excited about the ethanol market. I think if you look at today's supply and demand scenario, if you look at history, ethanol in the past 10 to 15 years has really been where we're gaining new demand. Livestock continues to be an extremely important market and one that consumes most of the corn. But if you look at growth, we haven't seen a lot of growth in livestock demand for corn, and we've seen that growth from ethanol. And so we've got to a point where we have the renewable fuel standard. It pretty well tops out at 15 billion gallons for corn-based ethanol, which is where we're at now. And so we're looking at how do we get past that now that we're close to 2022 when that tops out. And so I like to remind folks in DC, especially those folks that complain about the RFS and how it manipulates the markets supposedly and things like that. The price of corn today is lower than it was the day that George W. Bush signed the RFS into effect. And so did it have an impact on price? Absolutely, to a certain extent. Of course, that's why we supported it, but we're back to a price scenario that we need to do the next big thing. So we're excited about potential to move to higher blends of ethanol. And so if you look at requirements the automakers are having to move towards for efficiency and mileage and things like that, they can really only do that either through a high octane, low compression engine or electric. We obviously think that ethanol in a high octane engine is the best way to do that from our market standpoint. And if you look at the countryside, a place like Missouri, electric just isn't it's just not a feasible technology out in the countryside, maybe in some of these bigger cities and things like that. But we see ethanol playing a huge role and providing the octane for those engines. So you're talking about a turbocharged engine, a smaller, lighter weight, things that help them get that mileage. And so there's some regulatory issues and some legislations that have to happen to get that ball rolling. And so that's what we're really focused on in 2019. So as hopefully we see cars rolling off the line 5 or 10 years from now, those are going to be cars that can use a E25 or E30 blend of ethanol. That's going to be the standard fuel. You pull up to the pump, that's the standard fuel, and we're excited about that because we think it holds huge potential.
Yeah, it definitely would. I think the ethanol demand right there alone could be something that'd be really good for a lot of the corn producers here in Missouri.
Shane, I guess one more question I had for you was just in terms of grower engagement. So that's part of your title. And so if I'm a Missouri corn grower and I want to get more involved, what are maybe some ways I could get more involved?
There's a lot of ways to get involved with Missouri corn. Some of the simplest ways is we have winter meetings in every grower district, and so we send out those notices on Twitter, Facebook, our website, and so go to mocorn.org and see about winter meetings in your area. We've got several left coming up. We've got one in Marshall, Missouri coming up here in a few weeks. We've got one in Southeast Missouri coming up. Just had one in Butler a few weeks ago, which I think we had a pretty good attendance at. And so those are just good places to come, get engaged, hear updates from us, hear how we can get involved. Other ways to get involved are, Nick, you mentioned our Corn Roots Leadership Academy. We're really excited about that program because we're really targeting younger growers, bringing young growers in and helping them understand the process, how they can get involved, how they could advocate. And that's been a pretty successful program. I think we've had somewhere between 60 and 70 folks go through that now since 2011. And so that's a great way to get started. Obviously, you can engage with us on social media and things like that. And just really where we always need the most help is when a policy issue pops. When maybe a farm bill, we need a big push on a farm bill or an ethanol issue, or a Waters of the United States regulation, we need farmer comments. Just be paying attention to our website, our social media on when those opportunities are, because we need, at the end of the day, that voice. I like to tell folks every day I can walk into the president's office and say, this is the most important issue to farmers in the state of Missouri. But if I can't get a single farmer to pick up the phone or send an email or send a tweet about the issue, then there's not a lot of credibility to that. So the voice, the impact comes from the farmers. Am I a conduit? Is the association a conduit? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, when we work on policy issues, it's always when the farmers engaged that we have the most impact. I think you saw this, we were just talking before we started about this whole Bud Light issue, and you saw farmers blowing up social media about Bud Light and what they said about corn syrup, and whether we got any real results out of that or not is to be questioned. But you saw that a major company, multinational company, responded and saw that they had to respond when a bunch of growers got engaged.
I think that puts kind of the cap on that whole thing right there, is just being able to utilize an association like Missouri Corn Growers to understand the policy issues and the things that are going to affect you as a corn grower. And then when they call for your action, for growers, producers out there, to go out there and have your voice be heard, I think that's something in all the ag industry that has become more and more important. So it's excellent that we got fine folks like yourself doing that and taking care of some of that work for us, and the fine work that you do here at Missouri Corn Growers Association.
Shane, you have any last fleeting thoughts?
I'd just say go to www.mocorn.org. A lot of resources there. You can learn about our association. You can see who your board member is if you're in Missouri, see who represents you. It's probably a face that you recognize, and that's your person to talk to. So if you live in Northwest Missouri, District 1, you can see that Jason Hull's your guy, or Dylan Rozier's your guy, and a lot of folks know that they're people. And so if you've got a question about Missouri corn, and maybe you got a question about what we're working on, something we should be working on, that's the best way to get engaged, is talk to that board member. And maybe someday, think about being a board member for Missouri Corn.
Outstanding. So thank you again, Shane, for joining us today. Nick, it's important for folks to always know where to find us if they can't find us in the field.
They can find me at Nick Monnig on Twitter.
And I'm at the Jaime Farmer.
You can also find our podcast at podcast.pioneer.com. Appreciate you guys listening in today as we kind of take a break from the agronomy and product discussion and get outside of Pioneer just to learn a little bit about organizations around us in Missouri agriculture and what they do for us as growers and as industry folks.
And so with that, tune in next time. We'll be visiting with Greg Luce, talking about some of the other associations that Missouri has to offer, voices out there on the Hill and at the state capitol for them when it comes to Missouri agriculture. So again, we thank you for your time. Thank you for your business. We look forward to speaking with you again.